My brother always calls me stupid for not having a degree. I made him an employee of my company. I started working at 16 because our family needed money. Dad had died and Mom was sick. My older brother Jason was already in college on a full scholarship studying computer science. Someone had to pay the bills, so I got a job at a warehouse loading trucks after school. Jason said I was wasting my potential, but kept taking the money I gave Mom for his textbooks and meal plans. After high school, I got promoted to warehouse supervisor. The pay was decent and I was good at it. I learned inventory systems, logistics, supply chain management just by doing the job every day. Jason graduated with his fancy degree and got a job at a tech company. First thing he did at our family dinner was announce his starting salary and say maybe I could work in his company's warehouse since that was all I was qualified for. That's when the comments started. Every family gathering, Jason would ask if I was still moving boxes. He'd explain his coding projects slowly, like I couldn't understand basic concepts. When I bought my first house at 25 with money I'd saved, he said it was cute that I could afford something in a bad neighborhood. His apartment downtown cost 3 times my mortgage, but he rented it. He'd bring his tech friends to family events and introduce me as his brother who worked in shipping. He'd always add that someone had to do the simple jobs. When I started dating Lisa, he told her she could do better than a warehouse worker. He actually said she was too pretty to settle for someone without education. Lisa was a nurse who didn't care about degrees. She cared that I treated her well and had my life together. Jason told everyone at our engagement party that Lisa was marrying me for stability, since educated men wouldn't date down. I started my own logistics company at 28, just me and 2 trucks at first. Jason laughed and said running a delivery service wasn't a real business. He called it playing pretend entrepreneur. He'd ask how my little truck game was going while he talked about his 6-figure salary and stock options. Mom would tell him to be nice, and he'd say he was just being realistic about our different capabilities. My company grew. Within 3 years, I had 15 trucks and 30 employees. Jason's comments got worse. He'd say anyone could drive trucks around. He'd explain that real business required understanding complex systems that only college taught. When I landed a contract with a major retail chain, he said they probably felt sorry for me. He told his girlfriend I was proof that some people peaked at manual labor. His girlfriend Ashley was nice, though. She'd ask actual questions about my business and seemed impressed when I explained our routing software and efficiency metrics. Jason would interrupt to say I was boring her with simple stuff. He'd change the subject to his artificial intelligence projects that he claimed I couldn't understand. At Mom's birthday dinner, Jason spent an hour explaining why educated people were evolutionarily superior. He said college acted as natural selection, weeding out inferior minds. He pointed at me as an example of someone who couldn't make the cut. Lisa almost threw her drink at him, but I stopped her. Mom was too tired from her treatments to deal with drama. That's when I decided to destroy him. I knew Jason's company was struggling. They'd been losing contracts because their delivery system was inefficient. They were hemorrhaging money on shipping costs. I also knew they were looking for a logistics partner. I bid on their contract through a shell company I created. My proposal was 30% cheaper than anyone else and guaranteed better delivery times. They couldn't refuse it. Once I had their contract, I made sure everything ran perfectly. Their CEO was so impressed he wanted to meet the owner of this amazing logistics company. I showed up to that meeting. Jason was there as head of IT integration. His face when he saw me was worth everything. The CEO introduced me as the brilliant mind behind their new shipping efficiency. Jason tried to say there was a conflict of interest. The CEO asked what conflict. Jason couldn't answer without admitting I was his brother, who he'd said was too stupid for business. Over the next year, I became their exclusive logistics provider. The CEO would invite me to strategy meetings. He'd ask my opinion on supply chain optimization. Jason had to sit there while his boss praised my innovations. He had to watch the CEO implement my suggestions over his objections. He tried to sabotage the partnership by creating technical problems with integration. I documented everything and showed the CEO that Jason was intentionally blocking efficiency improvements. The CEO was furious. He put Jason on probation and gave me direct access to their systems, bypassing Jason entirely. That's when I made my move. The company was family-owned and the CEO was looking to retire. He'd been grooming Jason to take over since he was the highest-ranking employee with stock options. But I made him a better offer. I bought the company, used everything I'd saved plus a business loan backed by my contracts. The CEO liked that I was self-made. He said I reminded him of himself before college became mandatory for success. The purchase went through last month. I walked through the front doors on Monday morning and felt every head turn. People stopped mid-conversation in the lobby. A woman carrying a stack of files froze at the water cooler. 2 guys in suits paused their discussion and stared. They all knew what happened. The warehouse worker who used to deliver their packages now owned their paychecks. I kept my face neutral and walked past reception toward the executive offices. Through the glass walls, I could see Jason sitting at his desk with the door closed. His head was in his hands, his shoulders looked tight like he was holding his breath. I watched him for a second before heading to what used to be the CEO's office. My office now. The nameplate still said Mara Terrell, but maintenance was supposed to change it this week. Inside, I sat down behind the massive desk and pulled up the company directory on the computer. 243 employees. Jason was number 78 on the list, head of IT integration reporting to owner. That last part was new as of this morning. I scheduled an all-hands meeting for 10 o'clock using the company calendar system. The notification went out to everyone, including Jason. I spent the next hour reviewing quarterly reports and trying not to think about how his face looked through that glass. At 9:55, I walked to the main conference room. It was already packed. People stood along the walls because there weren't enough chairs. I saw Theodore near the front. He gave me a small nod. Jason sat in the back row with his arms crossed. His face was already turning red before I even started talking. I stepped up to the podium and looked out at all of them. Some looked curious, some looked worried. Most just looked confused about what came next. I started explaining my vision for the company, how my logistics background could solve the shipping problems that had been costing them contracts, how we could integrate better tracking systems, how the routing software I developed could cut delivery times by 40%. I talked about growth projections and new client opportunities. Jason's face got redder with every sentence. His jaw was clenched, so tight I could see it from across the room. People started taking notes. A few asked good questions about implementation timelines. Jason didn't say a word. He just sat there looking like he wanted to disappear into his chair. When I finished after 30 minutes, people actually clapped. Not everyone, but enough that it echoed in the room. I dismissed the meeting and headed back to my office. I barely sat down before Jason stormed through my door without knocking. He slammed it behind him hard enough that the window rattled. His face was still bright red and his hands were shaking. He demanded to know what my plan was for him. His voice cracked on the last word. I stayed calm and told him to sit down. He didn't move. I repeated it slower. He finally dropped into the chair across from my desk. I explained that he would continue as head of IT integration. Same title, same responsibilities. The only difference was he reported directly to me now instead of to Mara. I watched him process this. His hands gripped the armrests. His knuckles went white. He asked if I was going to fire him. I said no. He asked if I was going to demote him. I said no. He asked what I wanted from him. I told him I wanted him to do his job. That was it. Just show up and do the work he was hired to do. He stared at me like he was trying to find the trap. His face went through about 5 different emotions in 10 seconds. Rage, confusion, fear, more rage, then something that looked almost like relief before the anger came back. He stood up without saying anything else and walked out. He left my door open. I could hear his footsteps all the way down the hall. Lisa was already home when I got there around 7. She had dinner ready and asked how my first day as owner went. I told her it was fine. She gave me that look that meant she knew I wasn't telling her everything. She asked how it felt to finally be in charge. To finally have Jason answering to me instead of the other way around. I sat down at the kitchen table and really thought about it. I expected to feel amazing, victorious, like I'd finally won after years of losing. But sitting there trying to put it into words, I realized the satisfaction was more complicated than I expected. Watching Jason humiliated in that conference room should have felt better than this. Seeing him practically beg to keep his job should have been everything I wanted. But there was something hollow about it. Something that didn't quite fit right. Lisa sat down across from me and took my hand. She said I looked tired. I told her I was. She asked if it was worth it. I didn't know how to answer that yet. The next morning, I got to the office early and pulled Jason's personnel file. I needed to understand what I was actually dealing with. His salary was listed right there on the second page, $85,000 a year. I stared at that number for a solid minute. His apartment downtown that he always bragged about cost at least $3,000 a month. That was $36,000 a year just on rent. His car payments for that fancy sedan had to be another $600 or $700 monthly. He wore expensive suits and took Elena to nice restaurants and talked about his stock options like they made him rich. But looking at the actual numbers, his salary was actually lower than I thought. Way lower than he'd always implied. He'd been living beyond his means to maintain the appearance of success. Suddenly, his expensive apartment and constant bragging made more sense. He wasn't successful. He was drowning in debt trying to look successful. The expensive lifestyle, the designer clothes, the fancy dinners, all of it was just a costume he wore to hide that he was barely keeping his head above water. I closed the file and sat back in my chair. This changed things, but I wasn't sure how yet. Over the next 2 weeks, Jason started showing up late to meetings. First it was 5 minutes, then 10. Then he missed one entirely and claimed he forgot it was on his calendar. His project reports that used to be detailed and thorough became bare minimum bullet points. During team meetings, he'd sit in the corner on his phone instead of participating. Theodore pulled me aside after a budget review meeting. He said Jason had been bad-mouthing me to other employees, calling the ownership change a fluke, saying I got lucky with some contracts but didn't actually know how to run a real company, telling people in the break room that I'd run the business into the ground within a year. Theodore said it quietly like he didn't want to be the one telling me, but thought I should know. I thanked him and went back to my office. I wasn't surprised. Jason was doing exactly what I expected him to do. I started a folder on my computer labeled IT Integration Reports. Every time Jason showed up late, I noted the time and date. Every meeting he missed got documented. Every half-finished project report got saved with timestamps. I stayed completely professional in every interaction. Never raised my voice, never made personal comments, just did my job and let him do whatever he was going to do. If he wanted to destroy his own career, I would let him do it without giving him ammunition to claim I was being unfair. I had emails. I had witness statements from Theodore and others. I had attendance records. Everything was documented and backed up. Jason was building his own case against himself, and I was just making sure there was a clear paper trail when it mattered. Mom invited us both to Sunday dinner 3 weeks after I took over the company. Jason barely spoke to me the whole time. He sat at the opposite end of the table and focused on his plate. When Mom asked how work was going, he told her everything was fine, said the transition was smooth, said I was doing a good job. I watched him lie to her face while she smiled and said she was glad her boys were finally working together. She gave me a look across the table that said she knew exactly what was happening. She wasn't fooled for a second. After dinner, while Jason was in the bathroom, Mom pulled me aside. She asked if I was happy now, not about the business, about Jason. I didn't know what to say. She told me she loved both of us and she was tired of watching us hurt each other. Then she went back to the kitchen before I could respond. Elena found me in Mom's kitchen while I was getting more coffee. She closed the door behind her and apologized for Jason's behavior over the years. She said she'd been telling him he was wrong to treat me that way, but he wouldn't listen. He just kept insisting that I didn't understand how the real world worked, that his education made him better qualified to judge success. Elena said she tried to explain that I'd built something real while he was drowning in student loan debt, but he couldn't hear it. She admitted she'd been thinking about leaving him, that watching him spiral into this angry, bitter version of himself was exhausting. Then she started crying and said she didn't know what to do. I handed her a paper towel and told her I was sorry she got caught in the middle of this. She wiped her eyes and said Jason used to be different before his ego ate him alive. She said she missed that version of him. Then she left the kitchen before anyone noticed she'd been crying. Monday morning, I got an email from Addison in HR marked urgent. She wanted to meet right away. I went down to her office and she closed the door. 2 of Jason's team members had come to her uncomfortable with being pulled into family drama. Apparently, Jason had been trying to recruit allies among the IT staff. He'd been having private meetings with them, promising he'd get the company back somehow, and saying I didn't know what I was doing and they should start looking for other jobs before everything collapsed. He'd been asking them to document my mistakes and forward him any emails where I made decisions he disagreed with. The 2 guys who reported it said they liked their jobs and didn't want to be part of whatever Jason was planning. Addison had their written statements. She asked what I wanted to do about it. I told her to add it to his file and schedule a formal disciplinary meeting for tomorrow. She nodded and said she'd handle the paperwork. I walked back to my office wondering how much further Jason was going to push this before something broke. The next morning, Addison came to my office with a thick folder. She sat down across from my desk and opened it slowly. 3 written complaints from IT staff members about hostile work environment issues. All of them mentioned Jason by name. She laid them out one by one so I could read each page. The first guy said Jason told him during a team meeting that I was going to run the company into the ground within 6 months. The second complaint was from a woman who said Jason asked her to document my mistakes and forward them to his personal email. The third was the worst. Jason had apparently told a junior developer that anyone who wanted job security should start looking elsewhere because I didn't understand how tech companies actually worked. Addison sat there waiting while I read everything twice. She asked what I wanted to do about it. I could fire him right now and nobody would question it. Creating a hostile work environment was grounds for immediate termination. But he was still my brother, and Mom would never forgive me if I didn't at least try to fix this. I told Addison to schedule a formal disciplinary meeting for this afternoon. She nodded and said she'd prepare the paperwork. After she left, I sat there staring at those complaints. Part of me wanted to just end this and be done with Jason forever. But another part remembered Mom in that hospital waiting room, asking if I was happy now. I called Jason's extension and told him to be in my office at 2 o'clock. He asked why, and I said we needed to discuss some employee concerns. He hung up without saying anything else. At 2 o'clock, Jason walked into my office like he was going to a funeral. Addison was already sitting in the guest chair with her laptop open. I had the complaints printed out on my desk. Jason saw them and his face went pale. He sat down in the other chair and crossed his arms. I asked if he knew why he was here. He said he could guess. Addison started reading from the first complaint in this flat professional voice. Jason interrupted her to say it was taken out of context. I told him to let her finish. She read all 3 complaints word for word while Jason got redder and redder. When she was done, I asked if he had anything to say. He exploded, started yelling about how I was persecuting him for being educated, said I bought this company specifically to humiliate him, and now I was making up reasons to fire him. He claimed the complaints were fake and I probably paid those employees to write them. Addison tried to calm him down, but he kept going. Said I wouldn't understand the pressure of actually having skills and knowledge. That I was jealous because he went to college and I didn't. I just sat there and let him rant until he ran out of steam. Then I asked if he was finished. He slumped back in his chair, breathing hard. I told him the complaints were real and documented and that his behavior was unacceptable. Addison slid the written warning across the desk. It outlined everything he'd done wrong and stated that any further incidents would result in immediate termination. It also mandated anger management training starting next week. Jason stared at the paper like it was going to bite him. He picked up my pen and his hand was shaking, so bad he could barely sign his name. I watched him scrawl his signature and saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. Real, actual fear. Not the fake concern he'd shown when he thought he might lose his job before. This was deeper. Like he was finally understanding that he'd pushed too far and there was no safety net anymore. Addison took the signed paperwork and left us alone. Jason sat there for a minute just staring at his hands. Then he got up and walked out without looking at me. That evening, Lisa was making dinner when my phone rang. She answered it and talked for a few minutes before handing it to me. Mom had called her instead of calling me directly. Lisa said Mom was worried about both of us and wanted to talk. I took the phone and Mom's voice sounded tired. She asked how things were going at work. I said they were fine. She said Lisa told her there had been some problems with Jason. I didn't know what to say, so I just waited. Mom started talking about when we were kids, how Jason always felt like he had to prove himself because Dad was self-made and successful without any college degree. She said Jason loved Dad, but also resented him because nothing Jason did ever seemed good enough. Dad would brag to his friends about me working hard at the warehouse, but barely mentioned Jason's grades or scholarships. Mom said she tried to tell Dad to praise Jason more, but Dad believed in earning respect through work, not through school. Jason spent his whole life trying to be better than Dad by getting that degree. Trying to prove that education mattered and he wasn't wasting his time. But it just made him bitter when Dad kept treating manual labor like it was more honest than studying. Mom said after Dad died, Jason got worse. Started putting me down to make himself feel superior. She was ashamed she didn't stop it sooner. She just wanted both her sons to be happy and successful in their own ways. Now she was watching us destroy each other, and it was killing her. She asked me to please try to work things out with Jason. Not for Jason's sake, but for hers. I told her I would try. After I hung up, Lisa hugged me and said Mom was right. This revenge thing wasn't making anyone happy. The next few days, I started actually paying attention to Jason, instead of just waiting for him to mess up again. He showed up to meetings, but sat in the back checking his phone every few minutes. His hands would shake when he had to present anything to the group. He'd lost weight and his clothes hung loose on him. He looked exhausted, like he wasn't sleeping. During one meeting, he was presenting some technical update, and his hands were shaking, so bad he had to put down the papers. He made it through, but barely. I realized I'd been so focused on getting revenge that I hadn't noticed my brother was falling apart. The satisfaction I'd felt when I bought the company was gone. Now I just felt tired. Watching Jason suffer wasn't making me feel powerful. It was just making me feel like I was becoming the same kind of person he'd been to me all those years. Theodore knocked on my office door Friday afternoon looking stressed. He closed the door and sat down heavily. One of our biggest clients was threatening to pull their contract. They'd heard rumors about instability in our leadership. Apparently, word had gotten around about Jason's behavior and the disciplinary action. The client was worried that internal drama meant we couldn't deliver reliable service. Theodore said he'd tried to reassure them, but they wanted a meeting with senior leadership next week. If we lost this contract, it would cost us millions and probably trigger other clients to reconsider too. Jason's mess was now affecting the whole company's reputation. I asked Theodore who the client contact was. He said it was someone Jason had been managing for the past year. I made a decision right there. I told Theodore to set up the meeting, but don't include Jason. We'd handle this ourselves. Theodore looked relieved and said he'd make the arrangements. The meeting was scheduled for Tuesday morning. I prepped with Theodore all day Monday, going over every detail of the client's account. I made sure I understood their needs and concerns better than anyone. Tuesday morning, Theodore and I showed up at their office downtown. The client's CEO and operations director were both there. They seemed surprised Jason wasn't with us. I explained that I was personally overseeing their account now given its importance to our company. Spent 2 hours going through their concerns point by point. Showed them our performance metrics and improvement plans. Theodore backed me up with financial data and projections. By the end of the meeting, they seemed satisfied. The CEO said he appreciated us taking their concerns seriously and that he'd feel more comfortable with me directly involved. We saved the contract, but it was clear I couldn't trust Jason with critical client relationships anymore. On the drive back, Theodore said I'd handled that well. I just felt tired knowing I'd had to cut my own brother out of his job responsibilities. Wednesday afternoon, Jason found out about the client meeting. I was walking back from the break room when he appeared in the hallway. He started yelling about how I'd cut him out of his own account, how I was systematically humiliating him in front of the whole company. Other employees stopped what they were doing to watch. Jason's voice kept getting louder, saying I had no right to interfere with his clients, that I was sabotaging him on purpose. I tried to calm him down, but he kept going. Said I was proving I didn't trust him and making him look incompetent. Addison came out of her office and told Jason he needed to go home for the rest of the day. He turned on her and said she was just my puppet. Addison didn't budge. She repeated that he needed to leave the building now, or she'd have security escort him out. Jason looked around at everyone watching. Then he grabbed his jacket and left. The hallway was completely silent after he was gone. That night around 10, my phone rang. Elena was crying so hard I could barely understand her. She said Jason came home and lost it completely. Punched a hole in their apartment wall and threw a chair across the living room. She'd locked herself in the bedroom until he calmed down. Now he was sitting on the couch staring at nothing, and she didn't know what to do. She said she'd never seen him like this. So angry and out of control. She was scared of what he might do next and didn't know how to help him anymore. I asked if she was safe. She said yes, but her voice was shaking. I told her to call me if things got worse and I'd come get her. After we hung up, I told Lisa what happened. She said this had gone too far, that Jason needed help, and I needed to figure out if destroying him was really what I wanted. The next morning, I texted Elena and asked if she could meet me for coffee. She agreed without telling Jason. We met at a place across town where nobody from work would see us. Elena looked exhausted. She ordered a coffee and just held it without drinking. I asked how Jason was doing. She said he'd been having panic attacks for months, waking up at 3 in the morning unable to breathe. She finally got him to admit what was wrong. His student loans were massive, over $200,000 between undergrad and the advanced certifications he'd gotten trying to stay ahead in his field. The payments were eating up most of his salary. He'd taken this job partly because the CEO had promised him he'd eventually inherit the company. That was supposed to be his financial security, his way out of the debt. When I bought the company, I destroyed his entire plan for his future. Elena said she tried to tell him he could find another job, but he was convinced nobody would hire him now, that I'd ruined his reputation in the industry. She didn't know if that was true or just his anxiety talking. She asked me what I wanted from all this, if making Jason miserable was really the endgame. I didn't have a good answer for her. I drove home that night replaying everything Elena had told me, the student loans, the panic attacks, the inheritance plan I'd destroyed. Jason's whole life was built around being the smart one, the successful one, the brother with the degree who made it. I'd spent years wanting him to feel small like he made me feel, and now he was falling apart. But watching him crack didn't make me feel bigger. It just made me tired. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the truck for 10 minutes before going inside. Lisa was on the couch reading when I walked in. She took one look at my face and put her book down. I told her about the coffee with Elena, about Jason's debt and his panic attacks and how buying the company had ruined his entire future plan. Lisa listened without interrupting until I finished. Then she asked what I actually wanted now. Did I want Jason destroyed, or did I just want him to finally respect me and see what I'd built? I didn't know how to answer that. The revenge had been the whole point for so long, but now that I had it, the satisfaction felt hollow. Lisa said I needed to figure out what winning actually looked like because destroying my brother wasn't going to fix the years he made me feel stupid. She went to bed and left me sitting there thinking about what I really wanted. The next morning, I got to the office early. My assistant had left a stack of mail on my desk. On top was an envelope with my name handwritten on it. I recognized Jason's handwriting immediately. Inside was a single-page resignation letter dated that morning. He was quitting effective immediately. The letter said he couldn't work for someone who clearly enjoyed humiliating him and that I'd won whatever game I'd been playing. He hoped I was satisfied now. There was no anger in the words, just defeat. That made it worse somehow. I grabbed my keys and headed for the parking lot. Jason's car was still there. I found him loading boxes from his office into his trunk. He had his laptop bag, a few framed certifications, some personal items. When he saw me walking toward him, he just stopped and waited. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked exhausted and empty. I told him I wasn't accepting his resignation. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. He asked why I'd want to keep torturing him. What was the point of making him stay when we both knew I'd already won? I realized I didn't have a good answer. I'd been so focused on making him feel what I felt that I hadn't thought about what came after. He threw another box in his trunk and said he was done being my employee and my punching bag. I needed to figure out what I actually wanted from this mess before I lost my brother completely. Then he got in his car and drove away. I spent the weekend trying not to think about Jason or the resignation letter sitting on my desk. Lisa and I went to a movie and out to dinner, but my mind kept drifting. Sunday morning, Mom called and asked me to come over. She sounded off. When I got there, she was sitting at the kitchen table looking pale. She said she'd been having some pain and fatigue, and her doctor wanted to run tests. She had an appointment that afternoon and needed someone to drive her. I called Jason and told him to meet us at the hospital. He showed up 20 minutes after we got there, looking like he hadn't slept. We sat in the waiting room while Mom went back for tests. Jason sat 3 chairs away from me. Neither of us spoke. The TV in the corner was playing some cooking show, but I couldn't focus on it. An hour passed, then another. Finally, a doctor came out and called Mom's name. We both stood up. The doctor looked at us and asked if we were family. We followed him back to a small consultation room where Mom was already waiting. The doctor said her initial tests looked okay, but they wanted to do more screening to make sure her cancer hadn't returned. They'd schedule a full workup for later in the week. Mom would need to take it easy and reduce stress. The doctor looked directly at Jason and me when he said the stress part. We drove Mom home in silence. Jason followed in his car. Inside Mom's house, she told us both to sit down. She looked at Jason and then at me and said she was tired of watching us destroy each other. The stress of our fighting was making her sick and she couldn't take it anymore. Jason's face went white. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Mom started crying and said she'd lost Dad already and she couldn't lose both her sons too. Jason broke. He put his face in his hands and his shoulders started shaking. I'd never seen him cry like that. He said he was sorry. He said he'd been an awful brother and he knew it. He admitted he'd been jealous that I was Dad's favorite, even though he was the one who got the grades and did everything right. I stared at him. I never knew Dad had favorites. Jason looked up at me with tears running down his face. He said Dad used to brag about me to his friends at work, about how I was tough and responsible and took care of the family. Dad barely mentioned Jason's college achievements. Dad respected hard work over degrees, and Jason never understood that until it was too late to ask him about it. Jason said he spent his whole life trying to prove he was good enough, and it was never enough. The degree didn't make him feel smart. The job didn't make him feel successful. Nothing did. So he tried to make himself feel bigger by making me feel smaller. He said he was sorry for every comment and every insult, and every time he made me feel stupid. He said I'd built something real while he'd just been playing a part. I sat there staring at Jason, trying to process what he just said. Dad had favorites. Dad talked about me to his friends. I never knew any of that because Dad died when I was still in high school, before I could really understand what his opinions meant. Jason wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and kept talking. He said Dad would come home from work and tell Mom about conversations with his buddies where they complained about their kids being lazy or entitled. Dad would say at least his younger son knew what real work meant. He'd mentioned me loading trucks at 16 while other kids were playing video games. Jason said he'd be sitting right there at the dinner table hearing all this while he was pulling all-nighters for his computer science classes. He said it felt like nothing he did mattered because he wasn't doing physical labor. I didn't know what to say to that. Mom reached over and put her hand on Jason's arm. She looked exhausted. We sat there in that consultation room, not saying anything for a while. Finally, the doctor came back in and told us Mom could go home, but she needed to come back in 3 days for the full screening. He said her blood pressure was high and she needed to avoid stress. He looked directly at both of us when he said the stress part again. Nobody talked during the drive. When we got to Mom's house, I helped her inside while Lisa went to the kitchen to make tea. Jason stood in the doorway like he wasn't sure if he should come in or leave. Mom told him to sit down. She sat between us on the couch and said she was tired of watching her sons try to destroy each other. She said the fighting was making her sick and she couldn't take it anymore. She started crying and said she already lost Dad, and she couldn't lose both of us too. I'd seen him mad plenty of times, but never like this. He said he was sorry over and over. He said he knew he'd been a terrible brother. Then he said something that made my brain stop working for a second. He said he'd been jealous that I was Dad's favorite, even though he was the one with the grades and the scholarship and the degree. He said he spent his whole life trying to prove he was smart enough and it never worked. The degree didn't make him feel successful. The job didn't either. So he tried to make himself feel bigger by making me feel smaller. He looked up at me with tears still running down his face. He said Dad used to brag about me to his coworkers all the time, about how I was tough and took care of the family. Dad barely mentioned Jason's college stuff. Jason said Dad respected hard work more than credentials, and he never understood that until it was too late to talk to Dad about it. He said every mean comment and every insult was him trying to prove something that didn't need proving. He said I'd built something real while he'd just been pretending. The next 3 days were weird. Jason texted me twice to check on Mom. We didn't talk about anything else. Lisa said I should call him, but I didn't know what to say. When the day came for Mom's full screening, we both showed up at the hospital again. We sat in the waiting room, and this time Jason sat right next to me instead of 3 chairs away. The tests took 4 hours. We got coffee from the cafeteria and walked around the hospital because sitting still was making both of us crazy. Finally, a doctor called us back. Mom was already in the consultation room looking nervous. The doctor said the tests came back clear. No cancer, just exhaustion and high blood pressure from stress. He said she needed peace and quiet and stability at home. He said family conflict was a major health risk for someone in her condition. Both Jason and I felt like garbage when he said that. Our war had been making Mom sick. We'd been so focused on destroying each other that we didn't see what it was doing to her. The doctor gave Mom some prescriptions and told her to follow up in 2 weeks. We took her home, and this time we both stayed. Lisa made dinner while Jason and I sat at Mom's kitchen table, not really knowing what to do. Mom went to lie down. Lisa brought us sandwiches and then left us alone. Jason looked at his sandwich like he didn't know what to do with it. Then he started talking. He said he resented me for years because I worked at the warehouse to support him through college. He said he felt guilty taking my money, but he was too proud to say thank you or admit he needed it. He said every time Mom mentioned how hard I was working, it made him feel like a burden. So he turned that guilt into anger and made himself believe I was beneath him. That way he didn't have to feel bad about taking my money. I listened to him talk for probably an hour. Then I started talking too. I told him I bought his company specifically to make him feel small. I wanted him to know what it felt like to be dismissed and talked down to for years. I wanted him to sit in meetings and watch everyone praise me while he had to stay quiet. I said it out loud and realized how much energy I'd wasted on revenge. I could have just focused on building my business and being successful. Instead, I spent a year planning how to destroy my own brother. We talked for 3 hours in that kitchen. It wasn't some magic moment where everything got fixed. We didn't hug or cry or promise to be best friends. But we agreed to try being actual brothers instead of enemies. Jason said he'd stop causing problems at work. I said I'd stop looking for ways to embarrass him in front of everyone. We agreed to try. Monday morning, I got to the office early. I called Theodore and asked him to set up a meeting with Jason for 10 o'clock. Theodore looked surprised but didn't ask questions. When Jason walked into my office, he looked nervous. Theodore sat down too. I told them I wanted to restructure Jason's role. Jason's face went white. He probably thought I was about to fire him. I said I didn't want him doing IT integration anymore. I wanted him focused on developing AI systems for logistics operations. Jason stared at me like I was speaking another language. I explained that his artificial intelligence knowledge was actually valuable. My logistics experience combined with his tech skills could create something neither of us could build alone. Jason was quiet for a long time. Then he asked if this was another way to push him out. I told him no. I said I needed his actual expertise, and I was tired of wasting it on integration work that anyone could do. Theodore jumped in and said he thought it was a good idea. He said the company needed innovation, and Jason was the only one who really understood AI. Jason agreed to try it, but he still looked suspicious. We spent the rest of the week setting up a new project. Predictive routing software that would use AI to optimize delivery schedules based on traffic patterns and weather and customer behavior. Jason would handle the AI development. I'd provide the real-world logistics knowledge about what actually worked in practice. Working together was strange at first. We'd sit in meetings and I'd catch him looking at me like he was waiting for me to insult him or set him up somehow. But we were both good at our jobs. His coding skills were actually impressive when he wasn't using them to sabotage me. My understanding of logistics problems gave him practical applications for his algorithms. After 2 weeks, Elena stopped by my office. She said Jason seemed different lately, less angry and defensive. She said he'd started going to therapy to deal with his anxiety about never being good enough. He was actually talking about his feelings instead of just lashing out at everyone around him. She thanked me for giving him another chance. 3 weeks into the project, Jason came into my office with his laptop. He was excited about something. He showed me a breakthrough he'd made on the routing algorithm. It could analyze thousands of variables in real time and adjust routes automatically. He'd run simulations and it would save the company millions in fuel costs and delivery time. I looked at his work and it was genuinely brilliant. The next board meeting was 2 days later. I made sure Jason was there. When we got to new business, I announced his achievement. I explained the routing algorithm and how it would revolutionize our operations. I gave him full credit for the development. The board members asked him questions and he answered them confidently. Isabella, who was on the board, pulled me aside after the meeting. She said she'd voted against selling the company to me originally. She thought I'd run it into the ground, but she was impressed with how I was managing things. She said the collaboration with Jason was smart business. I went home that night and told Lisa everything. She said she was proud of me, not for buying the company or becoming Jason's boss, for choosing to build something with him instead of just destroying him. She said that took more strength than revenge ever would. I realized she was right. Making Jason suffer had been easy. Working with him and trying to fix our relationship was actually hard, but it felt better than winning ever did. Isabella caught my arm as everyone filed out of the boardroom. She pulled me to the side near the windows where we could talk quietly. She told me she needed to be honest about something. When the sale was first proposed, she voted against it. She thought I'd run the company straight into the ground. A warehouse guy buying a tech company seemed like a disaster waiting to happen. But watching how I handled the transition changed her mind completely. The way Jason and I worked together on the routing project impressed her more than any MBA could have. She said I was proving that good leadership came from understanding people and problems, not from having the right degrees on the wall. Her words meant more than she probably realized because board approval had been split down the middle initially. The next week, Jason and I flew to Chicago to present our routing software to a logistics company that handled distribution for half the grocery stores in the Midwest. The contract would be worth 3 times our usual deals. We practiced the presentation twice on the plane. Jason would handle the technical explanation of how the AI worked. I'd cover the practical applications and cost savings. The CEO brought his whole executive team to the meeting. Jason set up his laptop and walked them through the algorithm while I watched their faces. They were impressed but confused by some of the technical parts. That's when I jumped in and translated everything into real-world terms. I explained how the software would cut their fuel costs by 30% and reduce delivery times by 20%. Jason added details about the machine learning that made it better over time. We moved through the presentation like we'd been working together for years instead of weeks. The CEO asked tough questions about implementation, and Jason answered them confidently. When they asked about scalability, I explained how we'd grown my original logistics company using similar principles. By the end of the meeting, the CEO was nodding and making notes. He told us he'd have an answer by Friday. We shook hands and left the building. Jason and I didn't say anything until we got in the taxi. Then he smiled and said that went really well. I agreed. Friday morning, the CEO called and said they wanted to move forward with the contract. Jason was in my office when I got the news, and we both just sat there grinning like idiots for a minute. That evening, my phone rang while Lisa and I were making dinner. It was Jason asking if we wanted to have dinner with him and Elena tomorrow night. Just the 4 of us at a restaurant downtown. Lisa looked surprised when I told her. We'd never socialized with Jason and Elena outside of work stuff or family dinners at Mom's house. I said yes before I could think too much about it. The next night, we met them at an Italian place near their apartment. Elena hugged Lisa right away, which helped break the ice. We sat down and ordered drinks. The conversation was awkward at first. Jason asked about Lisa's work at the hospital, and she told him about a complicated surgery she'd assisted with. Elena asked me about the Chicago trip, and I explained the contract we'd landed. Nobody mentioned the years of Jason treating me like garbage or me buying his company to humiliate him. We just talked like normal people having dinner. It was strange, but also kind of nice. Elena was funny and warm and clearly good for Jason. Lisa relaxed after the first glass of wine. By dessert, we were all laughing about something stupid Elena's cat had done. When the check came, Jason grabbed it before I could. He said this dinner was his idea, so he was paying. During dinner, Jason raised his wine glass and said he wanted to make a toast. Everyone got quiet and looked at him. He said he wanted to thank me for not giving up on him when he was being destructive and terrible. He admitted he'd been trying to sabotage our working relationship because he couldn't handle the role reversal. But I kept pushing for us to collaborate instead of just firing him or making his life miserable. He said that meant more than I probably knew. Elena's face showed relief, like she'd been worried about this moment. Lisa reached under the table and squeezed my hand. I didn't know what to say, so I just clinked my glass against his and said we were building something good together. The moment felt genuine in a way our relationship never had before. 3 days later, everything went wrong. Our biggest client called at 6 a.m. in a panic. Their entire system had crashed during a major product launch. They had trucks full of merchandise that needed to reach stores by opening time and no way to coordinate the deliveries. Their IT team couldn't figure out what happened. They needed emergency logistics support immediately or they'd lose millions in sales. I called Jason before I even got dressed. He answered on the second ring, sounding half asleep. I explained the situation, and he said he'd meet me at the office in 20 minutes. We spent the next hour on calls with the client's IT team, trying to understand the scope of the problem. Their routing system had corrupted somehow and taken their entire database offline. Jason started working on recovering their data, while I manually coordinated their delivery schedule using our backup systems. We ordered pizza at midnight. By 2 a.m, Jason had recovered most of their database, and I'd rerouted their deliveries to hit the critical stores first. The client's CEO called every hour for updates. Jason rebuilt their routing protocols from scratch while I kept their trucks moving. We combined our skills to solve problems neither of us could handle alone. Around 4 a.m, we both crashed on the couches in my office for an hour. By morning, we'd not only solved their crisis, but improved their system beyond what they had before. Jason's new routing setup was faster and more reliable than their original one. My manual coordination had identified inefficiencies in their delivery zones that we could fix permanently. The client's CEO called at 8, sounding exhausted but happy. He said we'd saved their product launch and probably their relationship with their retail partners. Then he said he wanted to expand their contract to include full system management. He trusted us more than his own IT team after watching us work through the night. Jason and I were exhausted, but genuinely proud of what we'd accomplished together. We grabbed breakfast at a diner near the office and didn't talk much. We were too tired. But sitting there eating eggs and drinking coffee felt comfortable in a way it never had with my brother before. Mom called that weekend and invited us both to Sunday dinner. Her voice sounded happy when I answered. She said she wanted to see her boys together. Jason and I showed up at her house at the same time and walked in together talking about a project deadline. Mom smiled when she saw us. Not her usual worried smile, but a real one that reached her eyes. During dinner, she told us Dad would be proud of both of us. Not just for what we'd accomplished in business, but for finally figuring out how to be brothers. She said Dad always believed we'd do great things if we learned to work together instead of against each other. For the first time, neither Jason nor I felt the need to compete for that pride. We both just accepted it. After dinner, Jason helped me clear the dishes without being asked. Mom watched us from the doorway, looking happier than I'd seen her in years. Theodore stopped by my office Monday morning with the quarterly reports. Before he left, he mentioned that company morale had improved dramatically over the past month. Employees felt more secure and optimistic about the company's direction now that leadership was actually working together. The IT team had stopped complaining about integration problems. The logistics staff wasn't worried about layoffs anymore. People were talking about growth and opportunities instead of just trying to survive the ownership transition. He said the change in atmosphere was obvious to everyone. I asked him to thank the staff for their patience during the transition. He said they were just glad to see Jason and me acting like adults instead of enemies. Jason knocked on my office door Wednesday afternoon looking nervous. He sat down and said he wanted to talk about something. He asked if I'd consider selling him a small equity stake in the company. Not to take control or challenge my ownership, just to have a piece of what we were building together. He said he wanted to invest in our collaboration and prove he was committed to making this work long-term. I thought about it for a minute. The old me would have said no just to keep all the power, but that wasn't what I wanted anymore. I told him I'd sell him 5% at a fair market price. He could pay it off over time through salary deductions. His face showed relief and something like gratitude. We shook hands on it. He said he'd have his lawyer draw up the paperwork. I said we'd use the same lawyer to keep it simple. Lisa came home from lunch with Elena the next week looking happy. She said they'd had a great time talking and laughing about dealing with the Hampton brothers. Elena had stories about Jason's anxiety and perfectionism that matched Lisa's stories about my stubbornness and pride. They'd bonded over the experience of loving difficult men who were finally growing up. Lisa told me it was nice to see our family drama turning into something healthier. She said Elena was good for Jason, and that maybe the four of us could actually be friends. I realized that's what was happening. We were building real relationships instead of just maintaining family obligations. It felt strange but good. Like we were finally becoming the family we should have been all along. The industry conference was bigger than I expected. Jason and I set up our booth in the main hall with displays showing our AI logistics platform in action. Companies started stopping by within the first hour. A regional shipping company asked detailed questions about our routing algorithms. A national retailer wanted to know about licensing options. By lunch, we'd collected business cards from 12 different companies, all interested in our technology. Jason handled the technical questions while I explained the practical applications. We worked together without any awkwardness now. It felt natural. A woman from a major tech company spent 20 minutes watching our demo and then asked if we'd be interested in a partnership discussion. She handed me her card and said her CEO would want to meet us. Jason looked at me with genuine excitement instead of competition. We grabbed lunch at the hotel restaurant and sat in a quiet corner booth away from the conference crowds. Jason pushed his food around his plate for a minute before looking up at me. He said he needed to tell me something he should have said years ago. He was sorry for all the years of making me feel stupid. Every comment about my lack of degree, every insult about my intelligence, all of it was wrong. He admitted he was projecting his own insecurities onto me because he felt inadequate despite having the degree Dad never got. He said I'd taught him more about real business in the past 6 months than his 4 years of college ever did. His voice cracked a little when he said it. I felt something release in my chest that I hadn't realized I'd been holding on to. I told him I needed to apologize too. I was sorry for buying the company specifically to hurt him. The revenge didn't make me feel better the way I thought it would. It almost cost us our relationship, and that would have been worse than anything he'd ever said to me. I admitted that watching him struggle at work made me feel hollow instead of satisfied. We both sat there for a minute just looking at each other. Jason said we both had things to learn from each other, and maybe we could actually do that now instead of competing. I agreed. We finished lunch and went back to the conference feeling lighter somehow. 6 months passed, and the numbers Theodore showed me were better than our most optimistic projections. The company was profitable beyond anything Mara had achieved in her final years. Jason's AI platform was attracting serious investor interest. 3 venture capital firms had reached out asking about funding opportunities. The technology Jason developed was getting attention from companies across multiple industries. Our combined leadership was actually working. I'd brought the logistics efficiency and practical business sense, while Jason provided the technical innovation and systems thinking. The employees seemed happier too. Theodore mentioned that people felt like the company finally had a clear direction, instead of just trying to survive. I called Jason into my office one morning with official paperwork ready. I told him I was creating a new position for him, Chief Technology Officer. The role recognized his expertise while keeping clear boundaries about our working relationship. He would report to me as owner, but he'd have real authority and respect in his domain. His own team, his own budget, his own projects to develop. Jason looked at the paperwork and then at me. He signed it without the defensiveness I would have seen a year ago. He thanked me and said he wouldn't let me down. I believed him. Elena called me at work one Tuesday afternoon, sounding happy and nervous at the same time. She said Jason wanted to ask me something and that I should come over for dinner that weekend. I showed up Saturday night with Lisa and a bottle of wine. We ate Elena's cooking and made small talk about work and Mom's health. After dinner, Jason asked if we could talk on the balcony. He was fidgeting with something in his pocket. He pulled out a small box and showed me the ring inside. He'd proposed to Elena the night before, and she'd said yes. Then he asked if I would be his best man. I was surprised enough that I just stared at him for a second. He said he knew it might seem weird given our history, but I was his brother, and he wanted me standing next to him. I said yes. Lisa cried happy tears when we told her. She hugged Elena and said our family was actually healing instead of destroying itself. Mom cried too when we told her the next day at Sunday dinner. Mom made pot roast that Sunday, and we all sat around her table like we used to before everything got complicated. She started telling stories about Dad that I hadn't heard in years. She said Dad always told her his sons would do great things if they learned to work together instead of against each other. He used to say that Jason had the book smarts, and I had the street smarts, and together we could build something neither of us could do alone. Jason and I looked at each other across the table. We finally understood what Dad meant. Mom said Dad would be proud of both of us now. Not for our individual success, but for figuring out how to be brothers again. Jason and I started a mentoring program at the local community center 2 months later. I focused on kids who couldn't afford college and wanted to learn practical business skills. Jason worked with scholarship students who needed help navigating the academic system. We met with our groups separately, but sometimes brought them together to show that there were multiple paths to success. Neither way was better or worse, just different. One kid in my group reminded me of myself at 16, working after school to help his family, smart but convinced college wasn't for him. I showed him my company's books and explained how I learned everything on the job. Jason talked to his students about the value of education, but also its limitations. He told them a degree doesn't make you better than anyone else. It's just one tool among many. The company hit a major milestone when we landed our biggest contract yet. A national retail chain wanted to implement our AI logistics platform across all their distribution centers. The deal was worth more than our entire previous year's revenue. We threw a celebration party at a downtown hotel for all the employees. Everyone dressed up and actually seemed excited instead of just going through the motions. I gave a short speech thanking everyone for their hard work during the transition. Then Jason stood up and asked if he could say something. He walked to the front of the room and looked right at me. He said he wanted to publicly thank me for believing in him, even when he didn't deserve it. He admitted that a year ago he'd been a terrible employee and an even worse brother. He said I could have fired him or destroyed his career, but instead I gave him a chance to prove himself. His voice was steady and genuine. Several employees who'd witnessed our earlier conflicts looked genuinely moved by how far we'd come. Lisa and I drove home from the party, and she was quiet for a while. Finally, she said she was proud of how I handled everything. I could have destroyed Jason completely when I bought the company. I had all the power and all the justification after years of his cruelty. But I chose to build something better instead. She said watching me make that choice showed her who I really was underneath all the hurt and anger. I realized sitting in the car that she was right. Destroying Jason would have been easy and temporarily satisfying. Building a real relationship with him and creating a successful company together was harder, but it felt better. More real. More like something Dad would have actually been proud of. The revenge I'd planned so carefully ended up being less satisfying than just being a good brother and a good boss. I told Lisa that, and she squeezed my hand. Jason and Elena's wedding happened at a small garden venue downtown. The ceremony was simple but nice. Elena wore a white dress with lace sleeves, and Jason wore a dark blue suit instead of black. Lisa cried during the vows like she always does at weddings. Mom sat in the front row looking healthy and happy. When it was time for speeches, Jason stood up at the reception with his champagne glass and looked nervous. He thanked everyone for coming and said the usual stuff about how beautiful Elena looked. Then he turned toward where I was sitting with Lisa. He said something I never expected. He told everyone that his little brother taught him the most important lesson of his life. He said intelligence comes in lots of different forms and that a piece of paper from a college doesn't measure what someone is worth. He said he spent years thinking he was smarter than me because of his degree, but that I was the one who understood what really mattered. His voice cracked a little when he said it. The whole room was quiet. I felt something tight in my chest and realized I was actually touched by what he said. Lisa squeezed my hand under the table. After the wedding, work got even better. We landed a partnership with a major tech company that wanted our AI logistics platform built into their systems. The deal took 3 months to close, but when it finally happened, it was huge. The kind of contract that proved everything Jason and I created together was real and valuable. We signed the papers in a conference room with their executives and our lawyers. Theodore was there grinning like he'd won the lottery. The tech company's CEO shook both our hands and said our platform was exactly what the industry needed. On Sunday dinner a few weeks later, Mom made her famous pot roast and had us all over. Jason and Elena came early to help set the table. Lisa brought dessert. We were all sitting down getting ready to eat when Mom stood up and tapped her wine glass. She said she had an announcement. My stomach dropped for a second, thinking something was wrong. But then she smiled bigger than I'd seen in years. She told us her latest scan came back clear, and her doctor said she was officially cancer-free for 5 years. She said she wanted to celebrate with her whole family together, and happy for once. Jason and I both stood up and hugged her at the same time. We ended up sitting on either side of her at the table, and she held both our hands. She looked at each of us and said, "Dad would be so proud." Sitting there with my brother on one side of Mom and me on the other, I realized something. Buying Jason's company and becoming his boss was supposed to be the ending of our story, the big revenge that made everything even. But it turned out to be the beginning of something better instead. We're not perfect brothers. We still argue sometimes about business decisions. Jason still explains technical things in too much detail, and I still get annoyed when he does it. But we're finally real brothers now. We show up for each other. We build things together. We sit at Mom's table and hold her hands. That's enough.